Happy Sunday morning to everybody. We had a breakout this week in the Nasdaq Composite and the S&P 500 to all-time highs. After a little bit of faltering earlier in the week by the S&P 500, we saw both the S&P and the Nasdaq push to all-time highs on Friday. I got a tweet from somebody asking me if I was concerned about the lower volume on the breakout. And, I suppose if I go rummaging around in my closet, I can get concerned about the boogeyman being in there. But as you know already, I don't really pay attention a great deal to the indexes, only for the purpose of putting out hedges in the SQQQ or the UVXY or the SPXU or the SDOW, the SDOW, to pick off, hedge and pick off some profits on these little breaks that you get. But the bottom line is I'm showing on my HDSI chart here for the Nasdaq Composite Index that we actually had a 5-day pocket pivot move. So that tells me that volume is actually higher as HDSI measures it. So, a breakout is a breakout, and I won't get too concerned about it one way or the other as long as the stocks are acting okay. And if we go through, actually, I'm going to go through 3 lists today. My new number 1 ideas for last weekend and this weekend, and also my actionable list for tomorrow. And we'll start with last weekend's number 1 ideas. And wanted to mention I did get a nice email this morning from a member who had a great week, they said, and obviously thanking me, and I appreciate that. That sort of makes my day. Well, not doesn't sort of make my day, it does in fact make my day. And I think that probably should have been the case for most members because we had a pretty good week. Now, there are some outliers, and I'm just going to go through these ideas from last weekend so you get a sense of how well things, for the most part, were acting this past week. We can start with Acacia, which I was talking about, buying this. You had an undercut and rally in here. And if you did get in position down here, you were able to participate Thursday on this upgrade. I think it was Piper Jaffray said they had 20% upside. And it had a big move. And a lot of times I will sell into that. That's a Bible gap up, starts here and ends here. Volume is pretty good. But the next day, Bank of America comes out and downgrades the stock. And I think the same, concurrently with that, you had the talks between the low-level Chinese trade officials and the U.S. Ended with nothing happening. But to me, that wasn't anything unexpected. I wasn't expecting anything to happen. And we'll just see where that goes. Maybe that had a double effect there. But in any case, it brought it in to fill the gap. And I don't know if this thing becomes viable again down here, but we'll see. So, but again, you had a great move here, and then it kind of blew back to the downside. So if you got in at the proper point, which would have been down here, as I discussed last weekend, you would have been okay even on the pullback. But it still hurts to get a nice profit like that one day and see it go nowhere, after that. But then, that's the market. Billy comes out with earnings tomorrow, so you want to keep an eye out for that. They actually had a great move, as I was discussing last weekend. You had a 1070 low here, and that was an undercut and rally. So on Monday, it got going through that, and you picked up about 15-16% in a couple of days, and then it petered out. So that was good for a trade before it came back to where it started, and we'll see what happens after earnings. Carbon black, I was talking about this as being a sort of a Wyckoff-ian retest as the volume is drying up down here, down in this area. And that led to a nice move up to the 50-day moving average over the next, this is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, up into Thursday, and you rolled back down off the 50-day on Friday. No surprise there, but that was good for a very tradable move, and actually not a bad move because if you picked it up on Monday, you would have been buying it at around 21. So let's be generous and say 21.50, and you would have gotten up to the 50-day line, which was 24.43 on the close. So that's 3 points on a $20 stock, roughly 15%. Not bad. Not bad for 3 days of work. Coupa Software, I talked about that one sitting right here at the 10-day line, and it went higher over the next 5 days. Huya, still keeping an eye on this one. It's had several runs at this low here, right in here, which is 27.05, but it's hanging just below it. Volume keeps drying up, and I'm sure it wasn't encouraged by what happened to Alibaba on Thursday, and it's still hanging tight along the 10-day line, but it hasn't gone anywhere. So if you're trying to play that, as I was this week, you didn't get anywhere. Made a few cents, but not much. And then IQ is still holding above this low here. I think this is 28.01 low, I believe. And yeah, that's correct. And you're still hanging above it, as you can see, with my crosshairs, and hanging along above the 10-day line and just let's say along the 20-day line just below it. And that's still in play. So using 2801 as your stop, that's still a viable stock. I talked about that in the report. KLA 10 car I talked about last weekend, and on Monday it pulled back a little bit, got close to the 50-day line. That gave you a shot to pick it off, and it went higher. Okta right at the 20-day line last weekend, as I discussed, and it's gone higher, broke out, no volume. Earnings come out next week. Not really going to do anything with it now. Also, the low volume breakout. Is that a problem? I don't know. Volume in this market doesn't seem to really matter. So open text, hanging along the 20-day line. You had a little undercut and rally on Thursday. If you saw that, you undercut this low here, which you had not undercut before. And then you rallied back above it, so that did okay. Paychecks moved higher. Perspecta coming off the lows of the little flag it's formed after this Bible gap up. It's gone higher. Qualcomm has edged higher, just trucking higher. It's now up 9 days in a row, I think, or make that 10 days in a row. You had a pocket pivot in here. You have a whole bunch of pocket pivot signatures over the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days. And that just keeps trundling higher. So maybe it's going to take off and run out of here. Spotify pulled into the 20-day line, and that's moved higher. Maybe Bible along the 10-day line. Square was Bible along the 10-day line. It's gone higher. Atlassian was sitting along the 10-day line real tight, and it's jumped higher. Take-Two, I talked about this last weekend too. And this is my list that I discussed last weekend's report. I think you double check that if you want by reviewing that report, that video report. But you had a pullback here on Monday into the 20-day line. It holds and it breaks out to new highs. Volume is not screamingly higher, but 2 5-day pocket pivots on the breakout, or at least pocket pivot volume signatures. Technically not pocket pivots because they're not both coming off a moving average. This one is on Thursday. So Zendesk was another one I talked about. It's sitting here along the 20-day line. It's gone higher and it broke out on about average volume on Friday. So not the type of Can Slim type of breakout you might be looking for, but we don't look for those types of breakouts. We look for pullbacks into moving averages. We look for undercut and rallies occurring within the bases, and those are my primary entry points. So Zscaler, I talked about looking for a pullback into the 10-day and 20-day. You got that on Wednesday, and boom, it breaks out it's roughly I'm going to say a trendline breakout here. You can play this a couple of ways. You can connect these two highs, and that's definitely a breakout. You can try and connect all these highs, and it's close to a breakout, but close enough because it went higher, and it's broken out on strong volume. But earnings come out next week, so not sure I'm going to play in that. There are a lot of other names that I've discussed in the report itself, such as Twilio had a nice move on Thursday. Trade Desk had a nice move on Thursday. And I think a lot of these probably are they are a little bit extended. Roku also is doing pretty well. Anyways, so now let's shift to my ideas for this weekend. I've been looking at the gold stocks, and most of that's engendered by the fact that the gold itself has undercut a major low. If we go back and look at say the GLD here, let's throw up another chart here, new charting window, and we'll make that a weekly chart. You can see that gold has undercut some of these lows down here, and I think it's actually this low, and it's trying to rally back above it. So we're starting to get some sort of undercut and rally action. And I saw an article last weekend that was talking about how gold is done for, and that millennials won't like gold. They're all oriented towards cybersecurities. Meanwhile, Bitcoin Cash is 90% off its highs, and Bitcoin is some 66, 68% off its highs. So I'm not so sure about that. I still think gold and silver have some utility as alternative currencies, mainly because they don't rely on an electrical system or an electrical grid. One of the things I find so curious about those who argue in favor of the long-term viability of cryptocurrencies, which I think long-term, yeah, but some of these things have gotten way overvalued in my view, and unless you have a massive devaluation in the dollar, I don't see why they should necessarily be higher, unless you've got people fighting over them and pushing them higher. So the greater fool theory, and I also find it ironic that it discusses decentralizing currencies, blah blah blah, but it's one form of decentralization that requires another form of centralization, which is an energy grid, one way or another, unless everybody's able to convert to solar panels, and we're all happily running off of an internet powered by solar panels. You're still relying on an electrical grid, and if the society hits a major crisis, as some of these crypto evangelists are predicting, then you would expect that the electrical grid could be subject to uh, brownouts, blackouts, and just outright destruction. So, if you want to go in that direction, I don't really see how crypto is the be-all, end-all of alternatives. And I still think something you can hold in your hand, such as gold or silver, or even good spirits, wine, dry goods, food, things you can barter with in a societal breakdown like that, I think, is more like what you're probably looking at, and where you would still have some utility for things that are physical. Anyways, you can see here you had a 5-day pocket pivot in the GLD coming above the 10-day and the 20-day, and you also have some movement in miners like Agnico Eagle Mines, which is, along with Kirkland Gold, is one of my favorite golds, just in terms of their makeup. And you got 1, 2, 3 bingo bars, oversold bingo bars here, and a 5-day pocket pivot, I believe, got through the 10-day line. And I'm just kind of watching this because it's also an undercut and rally move. If we look at the weekly chart, you're coming below this low here. That would be this low over here, and undercutting it here and rallying back above it. So maybe you're at a major low. Things are pretty ugly for gold, but a lot of that I think was caused by the dollar rallying. Arista Networks, a Bible gap up if you saw it. And technically at 29.40, that would be about 15 points. If your low here is 294.92 and you closed at 308.58, you are technically you're within 15 points, say, of that. So technically extended. But if you had a pullback, say, down into, say, 30, the low 300, say, closer to 300, might put it in a viable position. Interesting, though, this is a communications equipment, so think about Acacia in this vein, potentially indicating that there's some positive developments in the group. Activision Blizzard, this one I was talking about a while ago, and just to watch this because you were coming under these lows here and the 200-day line, and that did trigger an undercut and rally through this low, and so you got that on Wednesday. So you want to have your notepad out, and taking notes on this. We got a pocket pivot move on Friday. Now you're probably going to run into the 50 line and then back down, but apparently they've got a new game coming out, and they are going to. They had tremendous first day sales. So let's see. On this list, I also have Salesforce.com. That's a breakout on a 5-day pocket pivot, and you actually had a pocket pivot the day before. So technically within buying range of the breakout on a pocket pivot. They come out with earnings, though, on Wednesday. So not sure I want to play there. But I keep an eye on the other names in the group because they were all moving as well. That's why Twilio, I think, and Take-Two and all these other moves, these cloud names have been moving because of Splunk, which had a Bible gap up, opened up at 114.90 and closed at 123.69. That's extended, but I'd also note that it's a base breakout because you broke out through the top of this base. Notice how it comes straight up from the bottom. That's the old SUFB thing that O'Neill used to talk about. It doesn't really matter anymore, I think. You can see things, hang out and then head higher. So I'd watch this. If it pulls, your first point of reference for a pullback would be the top of the base. And after that, the lows of the Bible gap up. It may not get there, though. That's a huge move. So here's Electronic Arts, and this is hanging along the 200-day line. Now, if Activision is hopping and Take-Two is hopping, it stands to reason this one might hop too. Here you have a low here. So this low was undercut here, and now you've got an undercut and rally move occurring here. Volume was about average on Friday, so I'd watch to see how this pulls back. But you could see this thing turn. video games are still a primary form of entertainment these days. In fact, I've read that more millennials watch or play video games than they do watch TV. And if they are watching TV or shows on what used to be called TV, they're watching on Netflix or Roku, which had a great week. I hope you guys are in that one. Anyways, oh, just to backtrack a little bit, notice you had an undercut and rally, or you've had a couple of moves like that in Kirkland Gold, but it's sitting on top of this structure here. So I'm wondering if maybe, just maybe, it's finding support on top of here, undercutting these lows, and at some point you're going to get a good move through the 10-day line, which may be quite actionable if we see the price of gold moving higher. These guys have found a lot of new reserves. Apparently, that's what was leading to this move higher, even as gold was continuing to move lower, and very sharply so. This was hanging out pretty nicely. Let's see. Marijuana stocks were on fire. I don't know if any of you guys follow any of those. Personally, I've looked into investing in some money into a growing operation when it became legal in California, but looking at the potential margins in the business and also the potential for decreases in prices per pound, which is what you're looking at when you're investing in something like that. You're looking at the square footage of the growing operation, the electrical or electricity costs of the growing lights, and how many pounds per square foot you can produce in a growing operation. And obviously that depends on the price that you're getting. Your profitability depends on that. And I think there's probably margins are going to be declining. And once you get the big agri businesses in this, then you're really going to see margins decline. So I'm not so sure it's a great investment, but the stocks are going nuts. And these guys are all money losers. And there's a couple others. I'm trying to remember. Someone was on my Twitter page talking about another one. They're all going nuts, but they're extended. But this brought to mind GWPH, GW Pharma, which is creating drugs based on cannabidiol derivatives used for epilepsy and things like that. And you'll notice here you had a pocket pivot move coming off up through the 200-day line here. Okay, so you get that, you pull into the 200-day line here, volume kind of dries up, you get a little support here, and now you're back above the 50-day line and holding tight as volume dries up. And they don't come out with earnings until December, so I'm kind of watching this one, because if you get a frenzy going in these marijuana growing stocks, then you might see some interest seep over in here, and the thing heads back to the highs. Right now, you're potentially working on a big double bottom, with the midpoint being your buy point, and that's something to watch for if that's what you adhere to. Okay, with EA and with Activision and Take-Two pushing higher this week, and EA trying to figure out what it wants to do, but hanging in there above its 200-day line. We've got Turtle Beach coming in. I talked about that in my report, so that's one to keep an eye on. We saw ServiceNow launch on Friday. That's a pocket pivot and just barely perhaps a breakout, not quite to the highs, the prior highs, but that's coming straight off the lows. But you could see how this was setting up, and I think I probably mentioned this in one of my reports somewhere, because you did have these pocket pivot signatures. Unfortunately, it was not clearing the 50-day line. It didn't do that until Thursday on light volume, and then you get this big pop, and that's in sympathy to Splunk. I'm going to run through the rest of these real quick. Let's make sure I'm not missing anything. Planet Fitness, this is one we were looking at way back here, and then I just kind of blew it off, but it's hanging very tight, volume's drawing up here. Sunrun had a undercut and rally through this low here. You like that line, huh? Pretty straight. I've been practicing. I actually have my left arm back. The injury I had to my bicep, on my left bicep, has healed up, so I'm able to use my left mouse hand much better than I was before. And you're back up at the 10-day line. I'm not sure what's going on here. The earnings were negative, earnings growth was negative, but they are one of the last solar stocks to hang in there. And I've been keeping an eye on First Solar and SunPower to see whether those eventually make some kind of a comeback, but nothing really. Spotify you want to watch. Weight Watchers I think is interesting here. So let's go to my actionable list. And it's not very big. I'm watching this because tomorrow, if it opens down in here, I want to see if you fill the gap and turn, which you could. Wash some people out here. Maybe you come in a little further into the 20-day line, maybe you turn. And also Facebook. This is very interesting because you actually are okay. Remember, you had this undercut and rally back here, and I didn't talk about this in the report, but you did undercut this low here, and you had an undercut and rally, and that took you into the 20-day. You rolled back in. Now you pulled in, volume's drying up. You're retesting these lows where you have an oversold bar, but technically the 170.23 low here is still in force as a support level based on this prior undercut and rally. So you can, if you want to try and test this as a Wyckoff-ian retest, one other way to do this is to use the 170.23 low here as your selling guide. And I believe on Friday we close at 174.65. So you're not too far away from that. In fact, if you pulled back a little closer to 170, that'd make it even more potentially appetizing. Huya, as I said earlier, we got to watch for. IQ still in play. Momo, he had a big Bible gap up in here on Wednesday after earnings. It's hanging tight along the 50-day line. Earnings and sales are still very strong for this stock. It looked like garbage down here, but you had an undercut and rally off the lows. You have an undercut and rally up to these lows, and then you launch after earnings. Now you're hanging tight along the 50-day, so I definitely watch this as being potentially buyable along the line. Maybe you're running into some overhead from this side, so maybe it's going to have to hang out a little further, or a little longer rather, and extend a little further along the 50-day line before it moves higher. We'll see. Already talked about Planet Fitness, Spotify, Tesla I talked about in the report. And this is very interesting because on Friday night, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that Elon Musk had given up on taking the company private. And I don't know what that means for what he was tweeting earlier in the month when he was talking about funding secured, 420 buyout, blah, 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 and how the SEC is going to look at that, because now it looks like it was pretty blatant price manipulation. But we'll find out. If that sends the stock to the downside, watch for a possible turn somewhere, because they cannot kill this stock. And we'll just see what happens. Again, let's go back to Weight Watchers, and I think what you should be watching for here is you basically have an undercut of this low here. And these guys still have good growth numbers. So you got a couple of big oversold bars and hanging tight along the 10-day line, volume drying up, and you have an undercut and rally in force right now. And your low here is your close at 74.81. Your low here is 74.22. Is that right? Yes, that's right. So, pretty tight, less than 1% away from it. So I think this could be tested here with the idea that it's going to build, or that it is building a new base. And I think if the market keeps going higher, obviously no guarantee that it will, and you have a lot of names extended, so you could see a pullback, this could turn. So I think it's worth a shot, and you can keep risk to a minimum because I think it's like 60 cents or so on the downside. So some other things, we're looking at some of these cloud names. Workday is interesting because it just keeps going higher. And this is the old, straight up from the bottom of the base. You have a breakout here, it fails. It keeps rallying and rallying and rallying. You get a little volume here on earnings, or I'm sorry, on an upgrade, and you stall. And this made me think it was susceptible to potential failure, but it didn't fail. So that's fine. If it doesn't fail, I'm not shorting it, and if it seems to hold up in here, then I may just go long the thing. And now it's continuing to move higher, and it's acting pretty well. So we have to watch Salesforce's earnings on Wednesday after the close, and we'll see what happens with the group. Because now is also popping and bopping, and I could probably go through a whole bunch. Vive, I was looking at that. That thing is flying higher after earnings. And this is the same sort of thing. Where you break down, you undercut this low, and then you just sort of trundle higher. And the entire month of August so far, you've had 2 down days in this pattern. It just keeps going higher. And a lot of this is a little puzzling, but that's how this market seems to act. And then, you keep trundling higher, trundling higher. You think it could fail at any moment, instead it just launches. But anyways, there are still some things out there that are in viable positions. You might find that something like Facebook has the ability to come out of this because it's still very popular. And you could form another right shoulder if this is a long-term head and shoulders formation on the weekly chart. In here, I don't know how this would play out or how this would form out. I don't know if this is a big, but maybe you're going to head lower. I don't know. You could, but you could rally back up to the 50-day line, or you could just set up here and go higher, kind of like you did down here. And you're finding some support along these lows in here, so that's a possibility as a big stock turnaround. Netflix definitely did that, and I told everyone to watch for that push back up through that. I think it was a 322 low or something like that. Let's take a look at that real quick. That would have been this low here, which was, I'm sorry, I'm wrong, over here. 322.43, and that's what it did on Monday. It rallied back above that low, and it rallied all week long, and you had another pocket pivot on Friday at the 20-day line. So anyway, so there are still a few things out there that are in viable positions, but a lot of things have already moved up, so it's a matter of seeing how things pull back, and we'll just see how all that plays out this week as we go into what is essentially the last week of summer. So, and like I said in my report, I've got jury duty this week. I don't have to go in on Monday. That's what I found out this weekend, but we'll see how the week goes. Last time I had jury duty, I didn't get called in all week, so I'm hoping that the same thing happens. In any case, that's today's video report. Hope you got something out of it. But better than that, I hope you guys got a lot of things out of last week's written and video reports, because there are a lot of names moving on the Gilmo favorites list. So, on that note, have a wonderful rest of your Sunday, and we'll catch you guys later. Take care.